Hello, my name's Nicky Lambert. Welcome to this session. We're going to be talking about working with complexity and managing challenging conversations in practice. And what I mean by challenging conversations are things, conversations that cause us maybe difficulty or concern. And that could be for a number of reasons. It could be the context is difficult. It could be that the person we're working with is challenging to us. Or it could actually be that in terms of ourselves, we just don't feel that we have necessarily the skills or the confidence to do something. What we'll be looking at over the course of this hour or so is looking at challenging conversations, looking a little bit about aggression, looking a little bit about sexual disinhibition, thinking about our own self-care as well. You will have the opportunity to type questions in as we go through, and I'll try and answer them whilst we walk. Any issues, you will have this PowerPoint afterwards. You can certainly type in for a little while after the session is finished. I'll be going in and out of focus possibly, but don't worry about that. I look better blurry. So think about the kind of conversations that you found difficult over the last little while. I won't ask you obviously to disclose any details because there's lots of different people listening today. But I think one of the things to remember is that challenging conversations don't just take place between us we work for and work with, but they can take place among colleagues as well. So on the notes pages of this PowerPoint we'll be talking from today, there's also lots of links that are live, and one of them is to ACAS, thinking about the reasons that you might want to get support when you're working with people as well. So that gives you lots of options and offers there. Okay, so thinking about why this session. Health and social care settings have always been challenging places to work. We're not always seeing people on their best day. We're sometimes seeing people who are scared or frightened. We're sometimes giving news that's really unwelcome or people just don't want to hear. And we're often working with people when the tempers are running high. But I think what's really important to remember is that, even if you see someone on their worst day, they don't have to remember it as a wholly negative experience. You have skills, you can get training, you can increase your confidence, and poor outcomes are not inevitable. What I would say is, having been somebody, my background is mental health nursing, having been somebody who has given a lot of difficult news to people over time, sometimes the thing that people remember all day is the one thing that you said to them, or your kindness, or your compassion, or your patience. So don't ever think that trying to work in that kind of positive, recovery-orientated, strength-based way is a mistake. It isn't. And sometimes it's the only bit of light that people remember from a difficult encounter. So we're going to be talking about anger, sexualized or personal questions, which can be a bit freak us out a little bit at the start of our careers, particularly thinking about sensitive issues with people and breaking bad news. And what I want to start off with, before I start thinking about some of the techniques, is this idea about being mind aware, being able to mentalize. One way of thinking about it is, what's our problem? And what are the things that we're bringing to a situation, and what's the situation thrusting on us? So all interactions can have value when you're supporting someone to thrive. If you're aware of your own emotions, your own strengths and weaknesses, and you're able to tap into other people's emotions, you're much, much better placed to support other people. In fact, it's the first step in sound communication skills, is actually knowing who you are, knowing what your boundaries are. And as the little orange box in the corner says, you have to be a bit human to help other people. So sometimes we put on this mask of professionalism and we wear it so hard that we push people away from us and we don't engage. So just a little exercise for you to think about for yourself, just a review of your own skills so that you know where you want to be focusing your attention during this session. There's some statements. So I pick the right time to broach issues. I'm calm when others aren't. I'm able to express empathy. I'm good at boundaries. I want you to have just a little look just for yourself and think about one thing you know that you're really good at. And one thing that actually causes you concern, or that you need to focus on. By looking at that, the things that you need to focus on, you can think about the particular parts of this discussion that can be useful to you. But you can also then think about the fact that you actually have strengths as well. So sometimes when you're doing a session looking at communication, it's like, oh, I don't do this, I don't do that. And you can get into this negative spiral. One of the things that's really important for you to remember is how skilled you are. You've been communicating with people your whole life. You've come into this type of work because you care about other people. You have skills already. This is about building on what you have, not about beating you up about the things that you need to work on still. Talking about anger, and we're looking at the sort of cartoon about anger on the right, for a couple of reasons. So first, let's think about what do we actually mean by anger, because sometimes people think of it as a big monolithic thing, and it's not. Anger is lots of different things. So the first thing is this idea that there's a perception of damage, loss, or hurt. But what's really interesting about it, because we can all have our feelings hurt, or we can all have things taken away from us, and we're not necessarily angry. Where anger actually comes on is when our expectations are violated. So suppose you're queuing and someone cuts in front of you. It's not necessarily that someone is in front of you because other people are in front of you. It's the fact that you may feel that somebody has taken advantage of you. It may feel that you think something isn't fair. So the fairness is that we queue. So if someone jumps in, it's not fair. And that's what makes us angry. The fact that our beliefs about the world have been challenged. So there's something around fairness, reasonableness, and expectation. And one of the reasons I bring this up is if you treat people fairly, if you are reasonable, and if you manage expectations, so people know how long they'll be waiting, that kind of stuff, you can actually diffuse a lot of anger before it even gets started. The next thing to think about is this idea that it manifests not only emotionally, people think of it as emotion, but absolutely as a physical thing. It's a physical issue in that if somebody's angry all the time, it actually will affect their health, their relationships. It's a toxic experience. So if you think about the fight or flight on the right-hand side of your slide, you'll be thinking about actually how someone looks when they're angry, which is always quite useful just for you to be aware of. The other thing to bear in mind is if you're in a situation where tempers are fraying, it's likely that you're going to be experiencing the stress level too. You're going to be feeling anxious. You might be sweaty or clenching your fists, which sometimes people can misinterpret as you being angry. So there's something around the fact that be aware of the impact of feeling stressed, having adrenaline rushes, and think about how you can control and manage your own emotions under pressure, because it's really important to be able to do that. So there's lots of beliefs in society about anger, and they're really interesting. And of course, they vary across cultural backgrounds and across times and places. But there's a lot of interesting beliefs. So some people will say anger is inherited. So I get my anger from my father. He was angry. Everyone in our family shouts. We were a very angry family. And what's interesting about that is it's a statement that suggests that anger is fixed and unalterable, and that's not true. You can teach people to express anger, you can teach people to be assertive, you can teach people to manage distress. Anger is learned behaviour, but also so are more appropriate ways of expressing anger. And if you think about all the skills that you have in pulling the levers of society, all the social capital that you have in understanding how to approach people in authority, how to get things done, those are all skills that you can teach other people. And if you teach them those skills and you role model those skills, people don't have to go in being angry to situations that are frightening or frustrating for them. They actually have the skills that you have, and they can handle it differently or offering choices. Anger automatically leads to aggression. Well, not so. Anger can lead to energy that helps you to fight injustice, to recognize your own issues and get help for them. A lot of people can use the energy that anger is generated by anger to actually do good things. So in itself, anger isn't something to be afraid of. It's just another emotion. People must be aggressive to get what they want is an interesting one. And we'll be looking at instrumental aggression in the next slide. And I think what's quite interesting about that is this idea that people often get confused between being assertive and being aggressive. So being confident, being confident and being positive. So there's something around this idea about, when you're working with someone, help them to understand there's a difference and praise and support and reward behavior which is positive, and just be clear about the fact that there are things that are not acceptable. Another interesting one is this idea about venting anger being desirable. So in the past, I don't know why this happened, but people did believe that actually teaching people to vent was a really positive thing, letting people have a good old scream and shout. Now, sometimes it's inevitable. You have to live through that stage of somebody's communication, but you're not being trained to put up with being abused. It's not acceptable to experience aggression or distress that's focused on you or somebody else, particularly when it's associated with a minority characteristic, age, gender, sexuality, something like that. And that stuff is always illegal, and you should always report it. What you permit, you promote. So I would say around that side of things, it's really important just to be aware that, it's not something which is in part of your job as an expectation. It sometimes happens in our work as an unfortunate experience. So why do people do it when it costs so much and it is so difficult to live with being angry all the time? Well, if you look at the little pictures there's a reason why we employ anger. It helps us move away from discomfort. It helps us sometimes feel in control. And if we use our anger and then we're able to manipulate other people to get them to do things, we do have control. It's not a feeling of control, it's real control. And also, it's much easier to focus energy away from ourselves, not to look at our own issues or our own problems or our own concerns, but to push those back to other people. So there are really good reasons that people feel that anger serves them. If you can help them negotiate around that, you don't necessarily have to go through it. So this slide here might look a little bit complicated. Bear with it. It'll come good. So if you're looking at the little blue square at the top, so is somebody angry at that moment? So sometimes, they'll be red in the face, they'll be furious. It's quite obvious they're angry. And that's what we'd call hostile aggression. So you'll see a tension before that builds up. You will be able to use your de-escalation skills, which we'll talk about. And you'll be able to address the issue, empathize, and bring that down. Another type of anger, which is quite an interesting one, is called instrumental aggression. And that happens when the person is trying to get their needs met by displaying angry behavior or hostility. So suppose somebody wants your attention straight away, but you have somebody else you have to see first. And they say, I want you to see me. And you say, I'm just going to finish this and then I'll come to you. And the person goes up to the reception desk and starts kicking it. If people then come out straight away and they get seen, what they've learned is, I don't wait, or waiting is disrespectful to me as a person. If I'm angry, I get what I want. So this is what we're talking about in terms of instrumental aggression. If it happens a lot, you can actually use the ABC method to figure out antecedent, which is what was happening just before it, what was the behavior that was demonstrated, and what was the consequence. So I had a very weird experience. It's a nursing experience, but I think it's useful for you to hear about it. When I had a big stack of incident forms appear on my desk, and I usually just sign them, and I looked at them and I thought, this is all from one person. And it was all at one time. It was on at 8 o'clock in the morning, and loads of people had things thrown at them at 8 o'clock in the morning. So I went down to the ward, had chats about what was going on. And the situation was at 8 o'clock, someone's been woken up for breakfast and meds, and they were throwing shoes, cans, whatever they could get their hands on at the first member of staff who came in. And it was easy enough to sort out when you think, actually, this person's been woken up at 8 o'clock. Behavior is that they become aggressive, and the consequence is that the therapeutic relationship is damaged. All that needed to happen was to have a conversation about what time that person wanted breakfast. They'd rather not have breakfast. They'd rather have their meds at 10 o'clock. Fine. Nobody needs to keep coming into a situation that's going to provoke violence and aggression if there's no kind of therapeutic or no real benefit to it. So there's sometimes we do things because of patterns of work expectation that just aren't necessary. So there's something around the fact that if you're experiencing instrumental aggression, you're dealing with a different type of problem, which needs a different solution. So let me know if that's confusing. You type up and let me know. The next thing I just wanted to show was something around the cycle of aggression. And when you look in working with people who seem angry or working with kind of high tension, you come across lots and lots of models and lots of theories. One thing just to really bear in mind is that's all they are. They're representations of people's ideas. They're not written in stone. They're just a diagram. They're not inevitable. So just because you have a cycle that starts perhaps with a trigger to aggression and violence and then goes round to violence, that's not necessarily how every situation has to turn out. You know, any model that you see, you can critique. It's just a representation of an idea. It's not reality. It's a picture of one type of someone's imagination of reality. So looking at the trigger phase, you would be looking at, antecedent. All antecedent means is something that happened before. So you could think of it as a trigger. You could think of it as for example, in the case that I was talking about, antecedent was this idea that it was the staff going down and waking the person up that was causing the problem. The person wasn't waking up angry. It was the fact that we were creating a situation where conflict was occurring when we perhaps didn't need to. So all that we mean by antecedent is the same as trigger. So if you think about looking at what triggers are, you think about what causes situations to be difficult or challenging. Sometimes you can remove them. You don't have to have them. Having staff who are skilled and able to recognise when a situation is becoming heated, that really can help and support you, just to be aware of that. With a crisis phase, there are things that you can do in terms of de-escalation. There are ways that you can manage recovery, which we'll talk about as well. Some of the worst things I've seen are when someone's in the stage where their anger is abating, the other person saying, "Oh, well done for calming down." No, why would you do that? So there's something around the fact that being really aware of your tone. When you become relaxed and pleased that something is finished, make sure that you don't re-escalate it by accident. So the post-crisis phase, all they're looking at then is when something's gone wrong, and then you have the opportunity to review and sort it out. Sometimes we are so busy, we go from issue to issue to issue to issue, and we never take that moment just to stop for a second, pull back, and then think, actually, if we went about this task differently, it would be different. If you're thinking about assessing risk, so some physical conditions, some circumstances can trigger anger. So someone being tired, hungry, maybe if they've used substances, that might make their risk higher. If someone is confused, perhaps they have a mental health issue, or for whatever reason they're overwhelmed by events, you might find that that's a situation where tempers are likely to fray. Thinking about the emotions and actions, thinking about whether the type of information that you're giving. Sometimes if someone feels very overwhelmed by written information or forms, that's often a trigger. One of the things that I've come across is, you have lots of different expectations of the reading age of this country, but most people think it's around 12. So 12 years old is your average reader. Most people that are coming into services somewhere between 8 and 12. Years old in terms of their reading age. If you give them a load of leaflets, if someone is trying to understand who's coming from a different language, the information that's being piled on them, you can understand very quickly that people will get overwhelmed. And stuff that we do all the time that looks reasonable to us may appear very challenging to somebody else. Okay. So some of the skills that you might need. I appreciate that we're going quite fast, so we've only got an hour. I'll cover as much as I can, but I absolutely will be around for questions and things afterwards. So looking at stay calm, you don't have to be calm, you just have to look calm, which is a lot easier. Deep breaths, communicate simply and clearly, don't ask multiple questions, one at a time, plenty of space, keep back, don't touch people who are angry or distressed, because you don't know them well enough to be able to comfort them, and sometimes people really misinterpret that experience. Be kind. Sometimes it's really hard to be kind to someone who's scaring us, or somebody who has taken us by surprise a little bit. But there's something around showing concern and understanding that really makes a difference. If you position yourself in opposition to somebody, don't be surprised if you butt heads. But if you're working alongside somebody, it's a very different experience. The other thing I would say is your reputation is really important. If people know you as a kind person, a person who tries very hard, they know your name, they know that your intentions are good, they're much less likely to jump the gun with you. Another thing is about helping people to save face. When someone has got to a stage where they've lost their temper or they've lost their feeling of self-control, having a circus around them just locks them into that position. Particularly, I've done lots of work with young men. If you're in a position where young men are shouting and fighting, the cost of stepping back is so high to them, the cost of perhaps victimization and things like that. You have to get your audience away, get other people away, or ask that person to come somewhere else. It's really hard to back down. Convey a desire to reduce stress to make the situation better. So you can be saying things like, tell me what's bothering you, I'd like to hear your concern. Anytime you can get someone to start thinking about questions, like when did this first start happening, let me get it straight, you can actually slow down their thinking. And when someone starts to recall facts, slowing down their thinking is a really good way of helping them to slow down their emotions as well. So this idea about showing concern and understanding. So I want to make sure I've got this right. You phone first. Appealing to previous behaviour. So things like, I know we've sorted this out before, I'm sure we can do it now. Avoid audiences, we've talked about before. Make a concession is an interesting one as well. So there's something around making sure you can balance out the power. Sometimes people will offer tea or coffee or something like that, but if you're not sure of someone's emotional responses, I wouldn't give them a hot drink to begin with. You might want to start with a glass of water, see how it goes. But obviously you can read that situation for your best. Often people expect us to go into professional denial mode and things like that, and actually saying, I can see why you're upset. If that happened to me, I would be upset too. You know, we're terrible in professions at apologising to people and genuinely mean it. And sometimes people, I think, believe somehow that they're going to be sued if they, or that they're laying themselves open to some kind of legal costs or some kind of blame if they say sorry. Actually, saying sorry is a normal human interaction. We say it all the time. You know, this is a town where people will bump into you and you'll say sorry. So if you, if someone has been kept waiting, or if the service hasn't been what it should be, absolutely, it's fine to apologise. You're not changing the law or anything. So, yep, you have a point. Something's gone wrong. Let's work together to fix it. So, provocative phrases, things that I've heard people say, oh, don't be silly, things like that. That's obviously going to make a situation worse. Another thing about depersonalizing issues, what they're talking about there is if you say to somebody, someone says, I want an appointment to do this, and you say, well, actually, you can't have an appointment. All of a sudden, do you remember I said before about being oppositional? You're oppositional. If someone says, I want an appointment, and you say, the way an appointment is done is this, you're still not necessarily giving them an appointment, but instead of being like this, you're like this, working together to move forward. The skills that you want, there isn't a magic word necessarily, but things like don't tell people shouldn't or mustn't, don't talk down a parental tone to people. You might be familiar a little bit with transactional analysis. So this idea that you have parent, adult and child roles. If you talk like a parent and give controlling information to a child, like that's enough, don't be silly, don't be surprised if you inflame sort of like a childlike response, like angry or just emotional response back. If you talk adult to adult and you're making sure that you don't abuse your power, or you don't emphasize your power over somebody, if you're being asking people questions about how do you feel rather than telling them this is how you feel, you can actually have an adult response back, and that's much more preferable to you if you're trying to manage something. Failure to listen is huge. And we talked before about the impact of the emotions being so raw. Sometimes they can cause us to not listen properly. So there's something around don't defend your position rigidly. If you can't get an agreement on something and you can't persuade someone, just say, look, I'll have to park that because it seems like that's not going to change. We can sometimes as well assume that we're always right. And that's not necessarily the case if you've worked in services for any length of time. Underneath, you can see a little green box promising an overlooked skill that can change your life. Apologising, just saying sorry. I've put some words in there because sometimes people say, yes, and I'll apologise. And then when you hear apologies, they're awful. Some apologies are genuinely terrible. There's the non-apology apology, like I'm sorry you're upset about that, which is not helpful. There are apologies which are clearly done under duress, or there's the apologies where you feel like the person is being forced to agree with you just to shut you up. I think sometimes making an apology can be, we can think that somehow it compromises our dignity or our power, or it will be opening the door to other issues. But actually, an apology is just an admission that the relationship is more important than the problem. So I've written it down saying, I'm sorry that came out all wrong. We've all said things that have just slipped out, and as soon as we've said them, we've been like, oh my goodness. Sometimes people will be making a joke and the other person won't respond in kind, in which case, I'm sorry, that was inappropriate. I shouldn't have said that. I was trying to be friendly and I've upset you and I didn't mean to. That was a clumsy thing to say, something that somebody taught me really early in my career. When you talk to people who are vulnerable and feeling really raw, sometimes you can say something which is absolutely not meant to be hurtful or to inflame the situation, but it's genuinely, you could have done better if you'd had another go at it. So absolutely have an arsenal of these in your bag, and it will change your life. Don't be afraid to be sorry about things. Another issue that sometimes people face is responding to personalised or sexualised questions or comments, particularly when you first start off working. But you are in a therapeutic or helping relationship when you work with other people, and it can be quite confusing. So if you think about, for other people, if you think about how we make friends, so one person meets another, they ask about their family, where they live, all these normal kind of questions. And for somebody who's a service user, you're friendly, but you're not their friend. So you can understand why it can be quite confusing for somebody to understand the rules of how we have this engagement. And you have some people who seem to think that they work not for a local authority, but for the FBI. It's like, whereabouts do you live? You come far? Like, I can't tell you that. Now, there are different clients who pose different risks and different circumstances as well. So if you're working with a situation, maybe they're offenders or social justice issues that mean that you have to have very high security, that's one thing. If you're working with, a little old lady who's just being friendly, you don't really need to put her in an arm lock just because she's asked you if you have kids. You have these quite deflecting conversations. So one of the things that I sometimes say is actually, I introduce myself like I'm here to help you with this, such as I'm here as your nurse or your social worker, so that people are very clear this is a business relationship, and say we've only got quite a limited time, so I want to make sure we get the most out of it for you. And that can show that you're friendly, but you are not necessarily somebody's friend. When somebody is very confused about boundaries, I would be firmer, saying, I'm afraid I can't talk about that at work. We need to focus on how I can support you. But I generally am much more soft with people around boundaries. One of the things that you often find is when people ask you a question, it's actually because they want to talk about something for themselves. Like if someone says, do you have kids? They might not want to be interested in your kids at all. But actually what they want to do is talk about their own kids. So sometimes I say, is there a reason why you've asked that? Are your children on your mind at the moment? If in doubt, the golden rule is to go, I need to think about how best to answer that. I'll get back to you. If you're at a situation where you're absolutely stymied, you have no idea how to answer it, and it's just, you just left blank, go with the, I'll think about it and get back to you. You can say it with a smile. You can say it looking quite confused or firm, depending on what's best to be done. But it's important that you think about your boundaries at the start of a relationship, and that you set the helping relationship up so that people are aware of what you can and can't do and what you will and won't share, so that you don't end up down the road a bit further on when you have to be quite firm with someone, it might be embarrassing or difficult for them. Okay. If the person does have a problem, by the way, with inappropriate or sexualized questions, please take that back to your line manager, because it might mean that it changes their risk profile. With sensitive issues, that can be all kinds of things. It can be anything from child protection issues, it can be anything from incontinence to past history of a brush with the law, as we sometimes call it. So be aware that you will have to ask people things that are personal and that you wouldn't necessarily want asked of you. One of the things to do is to pick your moment. If you find a subject sensitive, think about what it is about the subject that actually makes it uncomfortable for you. And if there are issues your end, make sure you fix them before you start going out to work with other people. And take a universal approach. So, for example, suppose you're talking to someone about sexual dysfunction or situations where you might want to investigate if someone's feeling so low in their mood they're suicidal. I tend to take this thing we call the universalist approach. So someone will be talking about me, maybe they've cut their wrist or something like that. I'll say, okay, so you're talking about a lot of situations that seem difficult. It seems that you're really low in mood. Sometimes when people experience the kinds of issues that you have, they have a feeling that maybe that they want to die. Is that true for you? And people panic about asking questions around suicide. They think they'll put ideas in someone's head, or somehow that someone will go, oh, I'd never thought of it before, but now I do. That's all nonsense. I've been doing this job 20 years. I can promise you that if somebody is so low in mood, they're thinking about harming themselves or dying, you're not going to put an idea into their head that's not already there. But sometimes people won't bring up an idea that's very frightening or upsetting if they don't feel that they have permission from you to vocalize it. If they're not suicidal, they'll go, no, no, no. And if they are, they might start to talk to you about it. I think it's very important that you feel prepared to do that. And if it's something that puts you in a position where you feel really panic stricken, find a senior colleague and actually role play it and explore it so that when you do go out into practice and it comes up, it's not such an issue. So I've put, again, some how-to questions, because sometimes when you have these sorts of teaching sessions, people will talk a lot about, and then I'll do this, and then I'll do this, but they don't look at actually the concrete words that they will use to ask. So I hope you don't mind me asking, but just give somebody what we call a shot across the bows, an idea that something difficult is going to happen. So you give them that option to understand that that's happening. I hope it doesn't make you feel too uncomfortable. And I know that somebody will find this stuff personal, but I need to ask you about this. So another thing is explaining why you're asking a question. Now, we can ask all sorts of questions in our privileged position. That doesn't mean that it's okay to do that. And sometimes the most professional thing that we can do is actually not to ask a question. You know, if someone's had a past history of abuse, everybody who visits them doesn't need to bring it up. There's something around making sure that just because you can do something doesn't mean you should do it. And that if you do ask a question, there's a proper, justified professional reason you're asking it. The other thing is people don't have to answer our questions. And sometimes in some positions, maybe more vulnerable people feel coerced into answering a question when they don't feel comfortable. So I always try and say, it would help me understand better. You don't have to tell me, but it would be helpful for me to know, so that people are really clear that their private lives are private, and that, you know, you're not going to help someone to recover or to be strong, to be independent and not to need your service if the way that all of us ask questions is so demeaning and intrusive. It actually breaks people's coping or barriers down. So there's something around thinking about what we should do and how we give people the option to decline. Nearly there. So we're thinking a couple more topics we need to have a look at. And one is thinking about bad news. So bad news can be anything from saying that someone can't go home, they've been sectioned, to telling somebody that a loved one has passed or died, to be just saying that actually an appointment has been cancelled. So there's something around, or hasn't come back, a finding hasn't come back the way that somebody wanted to. So this is an overview. This has come out of oncology, so cancer research. Asking permission, absolutely. So someone said it's about asking permission about difficult issues. So absolutely. Do you want to go back one just briefly? So when we're talking about asking permission, what I mean is, just briefly, don't worry, I know I'm on track. So there's something around this idea about, you can say you don't have to answer, or it would be helpful for me to understand. But most of the time, if you say to somebody what it is you want to know, they'll let you know. And then, as you've rightly said, sometimes it's actually important to say, you don't have to tell me if you don't want to. And just record that. I've asked them, they've declined to answer. Yeah, thanks. So this has come out of cancer care. So obviously the kind of news they're breaking there is finite, terminal illness, treatment not going well, those sorts of things. But I think it's really important that we are as interdisciplinary as possible and take the best examples from everybody to think about how that we can manage this process. So this is the overview. We'll go into some detail about how to do it, but sometimes it's easier just to have a picture of the bookcase before you start putting the books in. So this idea about setting something up, checking what somebody understands and what they want to know, thinking about how you give that information, and then summarizing. Now, these stages happen in all sorts of ways. It might be that somebody sits down and then they rush you in, and then the last stage happens a month later. It might be that they happen over the course of an afternoon. It might be that they happen over the course of 10 minutes. It really depends on the circumstance and the situation we're talking about. So it's a diagram. As I said before, it's a representation, not a set of instructions. People don't have to follow them bit by bit. But they're the sorts of things that you can expect to be guided by when you're working with somebody and talking about something. So first of all, before you get started, make sure you've got your facts right. Make sure if you're giving somebody bad news, it's right. It's not going to change. So discuss briefly with your team what needs to be shared. If you've not had these kind of conversations before, then have a go with somebody who you trust and give you some good feedback. Make sure that your delivery doesn't make bad news worse. It's very easy as well to sort of delegate this stuff if you feel uncomfortable or awkward, or to dodge it. But it's a real skill, I think, to be able to calmly and clearly let somebody move to the next stage of their understanding. And you always delegate it. You never learn skills. So there's something around, sometimes it has to be you that does it. So obviously, nice environment. You want it to be as quiet as possible, private as possible. Don't get stampeded into giving information in a corridor or somewhere that's not appropriate. And allow time. I know nobody has time, but sometimes you just, if you're talking about something and it's really important, you just have to, other people will have to wait. This has to take the time that it takes. If you need, for your safety or for the other person's well-being, to have accompaniment, make sure that that happens too. So the first thing is to think about, what does a person understand about their situation? Thinking about how much does the person want to know? Sharing that information and responding to their feelings is important. Often it's not a case of, I don't want to know anything about it. It's more likely to be a balance between the two, thinking about what people might want to understand. So the kinds of questions that will help you to figure this stuff out is, how would you describe what's happening to you at the moment? What are you worried about? What did the person tell you when they first referred you to me? That kind of stuff can help you get an idea of what that person's base level of understanding is. Because if you're explaining something over here and they still haven't got the basics right, you're just creating confusion. So there's something around making sure you know where that person is. In terms of what does the person want to know, we have guidelines on informed consent which are really clear. We understand that people need to have information so they can make informed decisions. We also are aware that someone has autonomy, so they might not want to tell you something, or they might not want to hear something. So if that's the case, and you ask, can I talk to you about this difficult situation? They say, no, I don't want to be aware of it. There are things that you can do to follow up in terms of how you report that, and we'll go through that. So the types of questions you might ask are, would you like me to go into details at the moment or not? Is there someone else that I can give you that information with? Is it likely that you want 10 minutes and I can come back to you and talk to you about it? So there's something around, like, is it that the person needs more time? Is it that they need more support? Or is it that actually they genuinely don't want that information? You need to record that you've attempted to give it to them, but it's not been successful on this occasion. And then the team can decide whether they want to follow up with somebody else, or whether that's something that will be postponed for the moment and recorded why. Most of the time, it's not either or, it's about the level of detail that people can absorb. But also, when you know someone a bit better, you know what they're likely to find useful and helpful to understand. So if someone can't hear it, make sure you record it. So some people don't want to know, I can't read that, what does it say? Some people want to know what questions they have. Should you anticipate the questions or give news? I would actually, it depends on circumstance. Isn't that awful? That's not helpful at all. If someone needs to have information right now, I'll say, there is information that you need to be aware of at this moment. We can take 10 minutes. Would that be helpful to you? If it's something that can be delayed and it's a long-term decision, then absolutely work at the pace that's suitable and helpful for them. That's absolutely the right thing to do. It sounds to me like you already have the answer to that, which is be guided by the person's need unless it's an emergency. So good question. So next one, thinking about making sure that you have privacy. People may cry. That's okay. People are waterproof. Crying is normal and natural and helpful sometimes. If you look at the bottom, someone says have tissues handy. There's actually quite a big debate about tissues in these types of meetings. And for me, I just leave them out and I let the person decide if they want them or not. Some people feel that if you offer someone a tissue, you're kind of closing down their emotions, saying that, oh, it's not okay to cry. And there's something very pointed about if you take the tissues and just thrust them into someone's face. Some of the things that I've seen over the last 20 years, which have given me head shake moments, are somebody with the greatest of intentions getting a tissue out of their pocket, which is pretty manky, and then offering it to someone who was already crying. And I was like, oh. So just be aware, if you think that there might be high expressed emotions, crying, that kind of stuff, that you were prepared for it. We all feel differently about crying. Some people find it more distressing than people being angry with them. That's an issue that you'll need to work on. So don't get stampeded into giving information in a public place. Sometimes people are desperate to know things, and they can intuit stuff from your face if it's bad news. But try not to do it in a place where you expose them to people gawking. And one of the most awful, I think, modern things I've seen are people who take recordings of people on phones when they're in distress. So do try and protect that person's privacy as much as possible. Avoid interruptions, just the usual stuff. And it says a warning shot. So obviously I'm not talking about firing into the air here. That's not going to help. A warning shot is just giving somebody that little bit of prep that something difficult might be coming. And you do that by your body language. You do that by your face. You can say, I'm sorry, it's not going to be good news, or I'm sorry to have to tell you this. People can then start to brace themselves. So don't come out of nowhere with difficult news. Say it, then stop. It's the key to it. If you've got something difficult, say the actual words that you need to say and then stop talking. And one of the worst things that happens is when people just carry on talking and the person doesn't know if they really heard it because it was a shock to them, or they think that there's more and it keeps going. Some of the more difficult ones I've heard are when people are saying that someone's been sectioned, for example, and they keep talking. So the person thinks, oh, there's going to be more, so I'm not sectioned. Some of the things that I've heard are people saying, we had a family member try to get in time to see their dad, and their dad unfortunately had died before they got there. And instead of just saying, I'm so sorry, your father has passed on, he's died, so it's nice and clear, they said, your father's gone. And she was like, gone where? And they're just like, gone. And she's like, but I've got the car, where's he gone? It was so awful that I actually had to step in and say, I think what my colleague is trying to tell you is that your father hasn't survived, he's died. And everyone's like, oh, that's terrible, but you've got to say it, otherwise people won't know what you're talking about. Don't use euphemisms that make it so hard for the person to follow you. They really have no clue what's happening. So the couple of things you can do is that warning shot helps people get ready. Make sure that you give the information simply and stop. Sometimes you have people doing this long monologue and they can't pick out the important information because they're so scared or so angry. Sometimes people will slip into technical jargon, so they don't have to actually say you've been sectioned, or you're not able to go home, or I'm afraid your children won't be able to come home with you. They just don't say that. They just don't say the words, and the person is just left hanging. Pause frequently and check that someone's understood. Use silence as a really important tool. So let silence happen. Some people freak out when there's a gap in a conversation, but it's a really important skill that you can have, just to be quiet. Really, really hard to do when you're feeling that adrenaline, but so important to allow someone the peace and quiet just to process their thoughts, figure out how they're feeling, check that they've understood. That takes time, particularly when somebody is under pressure. Don't minimise the severity of the situation. Try not to soften the blow, because it just makes it too vague and too confusing. You can soften the blow by your compassion, not necessarily by using words that make someone more confused. So the other thing is, sometimes people don't want to be made to feel uncomfortable. So I'm not talking about service users or people that we work with. I'm talking about staff. It's sometimes staff's expectations of a situation are unrealistic. Like, I want to be able to give bad news, but I don't want someone to be upset. I want to say no to somebody, but I want them to be happy. It's like, well, that's not legitimate. Sometimes when you're doing something that's difficult, people will then be unhappy, and that's people have the right to reject treatment. People have the right to react to news, and they have the right to express distress. That's okay. I've said before, if that distress has become violent or aggressive or targeted at somebody, it becomes not okay. But in itself, to expect someone to be happy about sad news is a weird thing. Start out where that person starts from, so align with them. Help them to break down the information in small chunks and understand what's happening. Clarify that you're making sense. If there's an important point, repeat it. The other thing is listening to that person's agenda as well, because often people bury questions. So you have to sometimes listen for the emotion of what's being asked, not just the words, if that makes sense. If it doesn't, let me know. Yeah. So people respond to bad news in a variety of ways. Some people don't make any response at all. and that could be for a variety of reasons. It could be that we've misinterpreted. I can remember talking to somebody about a person whose husband had been very badly injured and died, and they were not sad at all because he'd been particularly abusive to them as a family, and they were very sad that the children would miss him, but they had a very different experience. And if I'd have gone in and said, "You must be so sorry, I'm so," and started putting my emotions on her, she would have really struggled. Whereas I was able to give her the news and let her express privately, and presumably a thought that she's never going to be able to share with anybody else, that there's an element of relief in that experience. So it's really important that people are able to tell you what they think, and that you don't go in suggesting what someone's response should be. I can remember as well being left to talk to somebody whose mum had been killed in a car accident when they'd been arguing. And there was something around the fact that, and I don't know if this will ever help you, but in case it does, I'll share it with you, that you'll often work with people who are experiencing a lot of blame or shame or guilt around their emotions. And one of the things that you can do that's really helpful is just to hear it. And it's important that you recognise that what you're doing is a public service. So just witnessing somebody's experience is so valuable. But do remember that it comes at a cost. If you were lifting bricks on a building site all day, you'd have to protect your back. But what you're doing is emotional labour. So being around people with very strong emotions is a gift, and it's a skill that you can build on. But it's not something that happens without a cost. And you have to make sure that you protect yourself emotionally and that you look after yourself. And that's what these last slides that are coming up will be dealing with. But it's really important that you remember that if you're watching the television and someone comes in and says, "What you're watching?" I don't know, and you've just been watching the lights go across, you're overwhelmed, and you need to take care of yourself as well. If your sleep is changing, if your appetite is changing, if your stress levels are changing, do be aware that this is a job which it's just challenging. It's a gift, but it's, as I say, has its experiences. Be aware as well, and I've only seen this once, but it really took me by surprise. You were talking about that build-up of adrenaline. I've had a situation where I've had to explain to somebody some difficult bad news, and they just ran off. I was absolutely staggered. They just ran, just like that. About 5 minutes later, they came back, and they'd run as far as the car park, and then realised you can't outrun bad news, and just come back. But it was a very strange experience because I genuinely wasn't expecting it. They literally took off. If that's the case, I said, that can happen. Have a cup of tea, talk about it, and move through it. So do make sure that you reassure people and you explain, actually, it's not a surprise that you have responded because of these things, because of your emotions, because of tension, because of social expectations, because of hormones, whatever it is you need to say, adrenaline. Help somebody to feel comfortable with their responses. Quietly and attentive listening is really important. Sometimes it's appropriate for you to help that person verbalize their feelings. So, how are you doing? How are things for you? You look confused. What's going on? You sometimes help people to move to the next stage, but don't forget that that's going to be at their pace. I wish this news was different. I say that to people all the time because the people I work with are lovely, most of them, and it's not fair, the things that they have to put up with and the bad things that happen to them. It's just not fair. And it's okay for you to be a human being in that moment and say, "I'm really sorry. I'm sorry this has happened to you." You're not accepting blame or guilt or shame for anything. You're not pie in the sky wishing, but there's something around connecting to another person that I think can be very valuable for that person. You have to read that situation in terms of your own self and the other person. But for me, I've always found it to be something that's important. And then starting when you're able to reintroduce some positivities. So I'm going to try and help you, so that people know that this isn't the end point, this is the start of the next point of the journey. While someone's experiencing very strong emotions, it's very hard for them to move to the next stage, kind of cognitive stuff, planning, and you have to sit with that stage as long as it takes, pretty much. You can't jolly someone out of it. You can't say, "Right, you've been upset for 10 minutes, I'm on a schedule." This is why I say these things take time. Allowing silence is really important. Don't argue with people. Let them say the thing they need to say and express their emotion without criticism. So this next stage might help you with this. So there's different types of questions and responses. So the empathetic statements are ones where you're using to connect. So if you're trying to connect and help somebody, to calm down, to sit with their pain, because emotional pain is just the same as physical pain. These questions or these types of prompts, and obviously you say the stuff in your own language, in your own words, stuff that suits your temperament and personality. Those things are very important. The I'm there, you're not on your own statements are key. The next one is this idea when you start to explore what that change of news has brought for that person. If someone is perhaps going into care, you can start to tease out what that means for that person. Sometimes people have made an error of thinking. So my wife's going into care, I failed as a husband. That's not true. I can absolutely see why you would think that, but it's not right. You haven't. This idea as well about validating responses. Sometimes when people are really angry or really sad or guilt-stricken, you can say, I understand why you think that. But there's another side to it as well, don't forget. So there's something around when that person's responses come out, you may want to validate them. You may want to gently remind them that there are other options too. But obviously you're best at reading that situation at the time. So planning and follow-up, and as I say, that emotional stage takes as long as it takes, and then the planning and follow-up can come later. So timelines are really important. So at this stage, you are almost like a guide. So when something really bleak happens for people, it might change their sense of self, their sense of identity, their feelings that they can cope at all. It might be that you change the way they thought their life was going to turn out. So the future that they always imagined, or even if they didn't really think about it, that they thought was going to happen, might not be there now. So the whole of their horizon has changed. So it's really important they have a guide at this point. Another one is when people die. For natural reasons as well as tragic reasons. A lot of people don't know how to plan a funeral. And if you've got somebody who is maybe, you're working with someone who's learning disabilities and their mum dies, they might be the main person left. And they might then have that responsibility alongside you. If you take it off them, you disempower them as a child or son or daughter, and that's not appropriate. But obviously, most of us wouldn't know how to plan a funeral if no one was helping them. So there's something around the fact that you might just need to pragmatically figure out what happens. Things like coroner's courts can be disastrously hard to understand. So some of this stuff is just you going online, getting the facts, and then bringing them back in a way that the person can digest. Make sure you keep people informed of what's going on. Make sure you keep a real clear record of what's been said. Get supervision and support. It might be that the person needs help planning what they're going to do next. It might be that you actually just say, this is the situation at the moment. You've got family or friends coming to sit with you, and I'll be back in 2 or 3 days and we can look at where we go next. So it might well be, as some of you have suggested, we circle back and that's the plan. But make sure that that person has coping strategies of some kind and reinforce them. Figure out who else is supporting in that person's life. It can't just be services holding somebody up like a tent pole. You need to have all the other stuff that goes on as well. So that's why I think it's so important that we connect up to what's around in our society in terms of cultural, religious centres, hobbies, all that kind of stuff. What's that person's strength? Be understanding. At some point, you're going to have to help them define what's fixable and what's stuff that they can influence. You're going to have to help them plan what's the most important thing first and then follow up the other stuff later. When that person's left, check your feelings. Check how you are, and don't make the next person pay for your sadness or your tiredness. If you need to take a break for 2 minutes, go outside, have a couple of really big deep breaths, do that. If you need to grab a coffee, you need to take a break, do that. Don't go on to your next appointment carrying, anger or sadness from the last appointment, because it's not fair for the person who's been waiting. Better you take 5 minutes than push yourself. You're not you're not a Pez dispenser of compassion and kindness. You have to make sure that you're regenerating and looking after yourself. Takes us on to the next point. Thinking about your resilience. So you're in this for the long haul. How do you stay fresh? So for me, what I've always done is I've moved around. I've done lots of different types of jobs in the same sector. I've done research, I've done teaching, I've done all kind of inpatient, outpatient work, 'cause I've worked abroad, I've worked in specialist units, I've worked in forensics, and I've kept myself very engaged, and I have such a passion for it still. You know, I love people, I do. And the idea that the skills that I've been accumulating all this time are of use is really exciting for me. And one of the ways that I stay resilient, and not every day I might add, but most of the time, is by actually understanding why I came into this work, and understanding that I generate my own reasons for doing it. You know, no one is ever going to pay you enough, no one's ever going to respect you enough. You've got to do this job because of what it does for you and what it means for you. And I think that's the best way to stay resilient with it. So thinking about your kind of spiritual side of things, I know people freak out when you start to talk about stuff like that, but think about what your values and beliefs are, how you keep your empathy intact, because I think we've all worked with people who quite frankly appear to hate everybody they come into contact with. It's not a good way to help people calm down. It's not a good way to give difficult news to people. It means when you give boundaries to people, you're unnecessarily harsh. You know, if you've lost your empathy, you need to take a break and take a step back. In terms of physical fitness, I'm sure you can see I am not the best person in the world to talk to you about this, but you do need to treat yourself with a modicum of respect, and your body with a modicum of respect. You know what's right in terms of your fitness and stamina, not eating Kit Kats all day out of a vending machine and wondering why you're tired all the time. You have to rest, you have to nurture yourself. And I think it's very interesting that we sometimes don't give ourselves the compassion and respect that we would demand for other people. So try to do that. Sometimes try and look at yourself as a professional, but as a person, and think, if I was my own care coordinator, what would I want for me? And make sure that you're getting at least the same standard of care that you give to people. It's really difficult to do it sometimes. Being able to be very emotionally aware, which is, remember our first slide, the slide that we started with, this idea that you have to be able to understand your own emotions. You have to spend some time with yourself, with your own ability to be quiet and still sometimes. So for me, meditation, relaxation. I was swimming this morning. I love to swim. I love that kind of silence. It's really helpful for me. I garden, not brilliantly, but nothing has died yet this year. I'm quite a creative person. I'm engaged in the arts. All that stuff, you need to be nurturing yourself if you're going to be giving of yourself the whole time. Things about understanding your own emotional regulation, being able to self-soothe, being realistically optimistic. You know, to be honest, most people we meet are very nice. They're just in difficult circumstances a lot of the time. Being able to impulse control is really as well, and that kind of takes you into kind of some of the thinking traps that some people have. You have some people who are quite black and white thinkers, so everything is terrible, everything is brilliant. Most things are meh. So there's something around being aware of kind of cognitive abilities, so CBT, so cognitive behavioural therapy. You don't need to be in it, but to be aware of some of the ideas of it will be very helpful to you. Being able to have mindfulness, and you can get it on YouTube. You can do on Spotify has playlists of guided relaxation and meditation at 5 minutes in a car before you go and see someone if you're travelling out and about. There's lots of things that you can do to put your mind and your emotions in the best place that they can be. Audre Lorde comes to mind here. So caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it's self-preservation. And that's an act of political warfare. I love that quote. You know, if you're in the trenches, as you guys are every day, you need to make sure that your main tool, which is yourself, is absolutely being nurtured and being supported. Last slide. Well done, everybody. You've done very well. We're coming in on our 1 hour, so I think all good. Treat yourself properly, exercise, eat and sleep properly. If you are having stress and difficulty in your life, address it. This idea about how we think about it. So if you look at the picture in the bottom, the reason I put that there, it's not the world's greatest picture, but what I particularly like about it is sometimes we say stuff to ourselves that we would never dream of saying to anybody else. So it's, oh, of course you've done it wrong again, typical of you. You would never say that to somebody else. So don't say it internally. Don't treat yourself with less respect and compassion than you would other people. Another thing is this idea about being powerful. There's tons and tons and tons of you all doing this job, all pulling against this tide. You are powerful people. You are intelligent. You are smart. You are connected. You are skilled. Be clear about what you will and won't do. And I find this really difficult. So if someone asks me, will you fit in one thing, will you do this, will you do that? Often I say yes, yes, yes. But actually, every time you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else. So you always have to think about what it is that you're trying to accomplish, what it is you're trying to achieve in your career and with the gift that you have, and take steps that pull you towards your goal and not away from it. That's really important. Whenever you're thinking about what you will and won't do, think about why you may or may not choose something. And you can always say, oh, that's not for me. I tell you who'd be great for that. So you can always pass jobs on. You can always encourage people to skill up. Say, well, I haven't got time to do that, but when I learned how to do it, I used this method. Here's the reference for it. You have a go. I think you'll find it really useful. And the last thing, the thing I want to leave you with is don't postpone joy. You know, we have this expectation in life that if it's not perfect, it's no good. That's not true. It's just not true. And when you see somebody for the first time start to be able to make a choice for themselves, that's amazing. When you see somebody who's always put upon saying, I don't want to do that, it's just, it fills you with such enthusiasm and such happiness. Notice the small steps. Notice the small bits of independence that come, people being a little bit more confident, a little bit more positive. And that's what nurtures you, being able to actually spot that stuff. And a lot of people overlook it. A lot of people think that people that we work with are not important, and that's not true. So do notice all the amazing, fantastic things that surround you. We're living in challenging times, but when have we not? So please do look after yourselves and each other. And thank you very much for your time today. I very much appreciate it. Thank you. Cheers.